Deborah Halpern is a multi-dimensional Australian artist. She's a sculptor, a painter, a potter, and a printmaker. Her work can be exuberant and whimsical, but it's also imbued with a deep artistry. Over her 33-year career, Halpern has produced an extraordinary body of work, and through her numerous public sculptures has become well known and respected within the community. Deborah's famous works include the surreal sculpture called Angel, which was once featured in the moat of the National Gallery of Victoria, and Ophelia, which stands outside the Southgate complex at Southbank in Victoria. Deborah is inspired by the free spirit of Pablo Picasso. Can you see the similarities in the shapes and colours that both artists use? Look at the use of shapes and angles. When Picasso looked at a human being, he broke up the body into the shapes and angles that he presents on the canvas. Deborah Halpern also breaks up the body, whether it's human, animal, or fantasy, represents the shapes on a 3D form. Halpern grew up in the world of ceramics, as her parents were ceramicists and artists. She began work in ceramics as an apprentice in 1971. She went on to study painting at the Caulfield Institute of Technology in 1979. In an interview with Art Monthly, Deborah was asked a number of questions about her work. She was asked, "What attracted you to mosaics and ceramics?" Her reply was, "Well, I'm not really attracted to mosaics. I know that sounds completely bizarre, but I'll explain it to you. In my upbringing, both of my parents were ceramicists, and I grew up surrounded by potters, so I was always making colourful, whimsical, and funky pieces of pottery. But as a potter, I was always restricted to a certain size. When the National Gallery of Victoria asked me to make a sculpture for the gallery, I had to look at how to make a really big piece. I thought I had to make a form and paint it. And then I thought, paint doesn't have the same quality as a ceramic glaze has. From that point on, I started to think, maybe rather than have a painted ceramic tile, I could just make up the picture from coloured tiles. Then it went from coloured tiles, making up the form, to what we would now call mosaic, even though I've been resisting this word for a long time." She was asked why she was resisting the term mosaic. Her reply was, "I think the mosaics I've seen in Australia have been mainly done by amateurs, and I don't mean amateurs are bad, but they're people who are thinking of it as more of a hobby. In my studio, I have a team. We are so precise, you wouldn't imagine the level of skill required to get these works done. I suppose there's a whole part of me which says, please don't call me a mosaic artist. The mosaic is really a means to an end. However, having said that, I'm now surrendering to this being a really interesting area of study." Deborah was asked how she starts a new work. Her reply is, "I often start with the shape. Sometimes when I'm working on a larger work, I'll work with clay and make lots of different forms with the clay. More and more, I work with a three-dimensional form. Doing a drawing is okay, but you're still left with a two-dimensional image." She was asked, "How have you seen your works change?" "Well, I notice now that I'm working with glass that there are so many different colours and textures to play with that it's almost like being a pointillist. But instead of putting a dab of paint on a painting, I'm actually placing a dab of colour onto a sculpture." "Can you describe what your studio looks like?" she was asked. "Well, my studio is a big glass box. Once upon a time, I had a studio where all the windows faced south because it belonged to a painter, and painters don't want direct light in their studio. But for me, I just couldn't handle a studio which never had any light coming into it. So I built this studio which is 50 foot long by 50 foot wide. It's all glass, so it doesn't have any walls. The studio looks out onto the bush, and I'm currently looking at the garden. There's a real kind of abundance and abandon which I'm surrounded by here, which I would say kind of influences the work that I create." She was asked where she normally looks for inspiration. "Well, the people who I'm really responding to at the moment are people who haven't been at the forefront of my mind before. People like Joan Miro and Gustav Klimt. The works of Klimt I used to think were too much and over the top, but funnily enough, it's really having an impact on me now. For example, the way he puts his peaceful fingers in the middle of his fantastic over-the-top design with the colour and contrast, it really represents life as it really is for me." Deborah was asked, "Do you think this influences the type of person who collects your sculptures?" Her reply was, Sometimes you might have a work that is commenting on what's happening on this planet, and it's a really powerful and confronting piece. I think that's really valid, and all credit goes to that work. But I think people can buy those works and think that by having something like that in their space or in their house equally means that they're making a difference, when it doesn't necessarily. I guess we just need to be mindful that making a difference in reality and making a difference superficially are really two different things. One of Southgate's most well-known icons has always been the mosaic sculpture Ophelia, created by Melbourne artist Deborah Halpern. As part of the redevelopment, Ophelia underwent an extensive restoration and relocation to a prime position on the Southgate Promenade at the entrance to the centre. Here, artist Deborah Halpern discusses the restoration process as we see the footage of the relocation work in action.
My name's Deborah Halpern, and I am an artist, a sculptor mainly, and I've made Ophelia. It's absolutely brilliant to be able to restore a sculpture that's been unattended, for so long. She has a real place at Southgate, so to be able to really attend to everything about her and bring her back to her original gorgeousness is really a special opportunity. The restoration work is going really well. To restore something is quite different from making it from the beginning, because when you start from the beginning, you're building it from nothing. Whereas when you're restoring something, you are dealing with something that's happened over time that you have to then undo. The challenge really is, given that we don't have years and years to do this, what's the absolute best we can do given that we've got a limited time? But whenever you're ready, she'll be ready. I think the new location is really brilliant. She really wants to be with the people. She's a sculpture for the people, so it's really special that she can now just hang out with everyone again. It's great. It's a really great story, I think, the creation of that whole Southgate precinct. It was a really fantastic kind of game to play. Ophelia, she's just this divine, wistful, sad, in love, optimistic. She's just a divine kind of person. Our Ophelia is standing there, she's living this whole life with all the people of Melbourne, she's wistfully looking at the river, in her quiet way, she's living the full life of, a woman in love.